For my CHS 762 course. I chose to do my research on depression and its demographic, behavioral, and environmental determinants. And so I used the NHANES dataset. So depression affects 280 million people globally. It's the leading cause of disability worldwide. In the US, the prevalence is 20 to 25% in women and 7 to 12% in men. And the risk factors are low income, race and ethnicity, smoking, inactivity, alcohol, and toxic exposures. So my study objective was I wanted to examine how income, smoking, and cadmium exposure relate to depression. The goal was to identify the key public health intervention points, so how we can 5,068 adults aged 18 plus. And so I defined depression as anybody with a PHQ-9 score that was greater than 10. For the bivariate results, there were significant associations with depression. With income, individuals with lower income were significantly more likely to experience depression, and those who are currently smoking had notably higher depression rates. And people with cadmium levels greater than or equal to 0.4 micrograms per liter had a higher prevalence of depression. Obesity, inactivity, and heavy drinking also correlated with depression. Surprisingly, insurance status showed no statistically significant relationship with depression. These bivariate results about low income and smoking being associated with higher depression rates show a strong association, and so this suggests bivariate results. Cadmium exposure, interestingly, had a significantly higher prevalence of depression. It was 11.1% in the high exposure group compared with the lower exposure group at 7.9%. So to summarize the results of the bivariate analysis, I constructed this table. And so amongst the individuals of my sample that had depression, 13.6% of them were low income, 6.4% of them were high income, 15.6% were current smokers, and 7.6% were non-smokers, while 11.5% were obese and 7.3% were not obese. So these bivariate findings are statistically significant, but unfortunately they do not account for the confounding variables. Therefore, the multivariable analysis provides a clearer picture of which factors independently predict depression. So as I was saying, the bivariate results showed strong patterns, but they only compared two variables at a time. For example, income and depression, or smoking and depression. But people don't live in isolation. Income, smoking, obesity, and other factors often overlap. That's why I ran a multivariable analysis to look at how all the variables relate to depression when considered at the same time. This helps identify which factors are independently associated with depression after adjusting for the others. So moving on to the multivariable analysis results, depression was significantly associated with low income. Low income individuals had more than twice the odds of experiencing depression compared to those with higher income. With smoking, it was associated with a 39% increase in the odds of depression, and with obesity, individuals had a 34% higher odds of depression compared to those who were not obese. High cadmium exposure was not statistically significant after adjusting for the confounders. So that suggests that the earlier association we saw in the bivariate analysis may be explained by the overlapping risk factors. With smoking, it was associated with a 39% increase in the odds of depression. And so this is one of the figures from my paper. It's the prevalence of depression by age group. And so this shows you that in the second age group, depression had the highest prevalence. And so the second age group consisted of individuals from 35 to 54 years of age. This is the next figure from my paper, and it's the prevalence of smoking, heavy drinking, and obesity among depressed individuals. And so it shows the prevalence of risk factors among depressed individuals. And so again, on the frequency, on the y-axis, we see that almost 250 individuals from my sample of depressed individuals were obese, and a large portion were heavy drinkers, and a large portion were current smokers. In this next figure, we're looking at cadmium exposure among depressed individuals. And so this is, on the y-axis, the number of people who had a low cadmium level in their blood. And then this is the number, this high cadmium is the number of people who had a high amount of this heavy metal in their blood. So to summarize the multivariable logistic regression results and these factors associated with depression, when we take a look at these variables, low income stands out as the biggest impact on depression, with 54% higher odds of depression, followed by heavy drinking, which has a 45% higher odds of depression, and smoking has a 39% higher odds of depression. But the main one that I wanted to look at, the high cadmium, was not significantly associated. And American Indian and Alaskan Natives had a 42% higher odds of depression, which is more of an impact than smoking had and more of an impact than obesity had. And so, in discussion, socioeconomic and behavioral factors play a strong role with developing depression. Environmental exposures like cadmium need more study. And the limitations are that some of this data is self-reported, it is cross-sectional, and there can be missing data. And so in conclusion, low income, smoking, and obesity are strong depression predictors. It showcases a need for public health strategies addressing economic and behavioral risks. And it suggests future research on cadmium, micronutrients, and mental health could be beneficial. And these are the main references I used. So the CDC's National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, taking a look at the PHQ-9 and its validity for diagnosing depression, and breaking it down so that it's measurable. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has a lot of interesting details about depression. And then the study from Smith on the study on the relationship between selenium and cadmium, to, of course, take a look at that idea that I can't get over about how you could remediate the effects of heavy metal toxicity with selenium. And then the behavioral health link from this paper by Wu, which was a cross-sectional study of smoking and depression among U.S. adults, to dive deeper into that relationship with smoking. And smoking is a really interesting one to take a look at, because if you think about it, it's exposing a person to 10,000 or and more chemicals, whereas uh, with the environmental exposure of a heavy metal like cadmium, you're just looking at one element compared to like 10,000 chemicals.